I'd got out of Northwestern University and gone teaching school over in Bordelonville, and they had the bombing of Pearl Harbor. I'd applied for the Air Force, and so they immediately called me the next day and sent me off to officer candidate school, and they decided to send some American forces over to England. They sent 3 B-17 groups, only 3. And the second one was the old 91st Bomb Group. And they had the flyers. Then they had to have somebody to take care of them, to feed them and house them and clothing them, doctor them and all that kind of stuff. I was in that outfit. And so they picked us up and sent us to England. And ours was the first group. And they didn't give us any supplies or anything else, just get on a boat and go. The first thing they did, they made me an agent of the United States Treasury. I had checks on the United States Treasury. And so I paid all the troops. And they set me up with an English banks over there. And so I would go into the bank and tell them how much money I needed, and I'd write them a check on the United States Bank. So I was writing checks for $1 million a month sometimes, and keeping money in metal cans there. I spent almost 2 years in England before they had the invasion, and so they selected our group to go in on the beachhead there, and so we had to go with them. And so I got on the boat and started over, and it was pretty nice. But when we got on the other side, we had to climb over the side and get on a landing craft and wade ashore. And the Germans were shooting at us, and all our ships were shooting at them, and so bullets were going over us, and we were going on these landing craft. So we got over there and got landed, and took over an old French farmhouse and knocked down some roads and there and so forth, and made a little runway for the B-17s. In Normandy there, they had all kind of foxholes and everything, and we'd set up pup tents to live in, and we dug. I had a trench right behind my old pup tent, and they'd fire range on it. And you'd hear a shot coming, and you stop a minute. It's going to hit short. It's going to go over your head, or you're going to hit it with you. You could tell the sound of the thing. So if it sounded like it's coming close, boy, you roll out and got in that hole, and it'd hit somewhere around you there. One night there on Normandy, we were sleeping in that tent, and had $1 million stacked up under my bed, and the Germans right over the hill. So about midnight, this word come, the Germans are going to come run over us. They're going to come over us. Boy, the word was to retreat. And we had a colonel that was crazy. He's going to retreat. Well, to retreat, you can see the ocean out back behind us. There wasn't no place to retreat. And so my orders were, you didn't let this money in the Germans get it. So we stacked it all up about midnight, and I had some fire bombs, and I was supposed to burn all that money. So I got all ready to burn about $1 million up. I had these fire bombs, I had the money all stacked up. And my men, boy, they was ready to burn it all up. I said, no, we're going to wait. We're going to wait a long. Wait till we see the Germans coming over the top of the hill, and we'll set fire to it. Well, they didn't get over to us. I didn't have to burn up $1 million or spend the rest of my life explaining to the United States Treasury what happened to the money. And we had a bicycle to get around on and so forth. So I threw the bicycle up on top of the truck, and it got ashore. So I was out on this little airstrip one day, and here come a little English plane come sailing in. And I happened to be the only one out there on it at the time, and then taxied up to me, and I could see the guy couldn't get the door open, so I went over and jerked the door open, and out came Mr. Churchill. And boy, he looked at me and he says, "Take me up to the front line." Well, the only thing I had was a bicycle, and I kept thinking, how am I going to get this man on a bicycle? But pretty soon a Jeep come by, and I ran over and commandeered it, and we got Churchill, and we went over to where our guns were firing, and he looked around a little bit, and he came back and said, "I've seen it all," and he came back. They'd start them out before daylight over there, and then they'd go over and bomb different things over there. It wasn't every day. I mean, maybe once a week they'd have a mission or something. So everybody went out to see them, and then when they'd come back, there'd be guys on the planes all shot to pieces, and they'd get them off in ambulances and all that kind of stuff. The Germans they had hundreds of planes, and they'd jump on these things and shoot them down. And so this one survived, so when it came in, it was a real miracle. Yeah, you'd know a guy one day and he'd get lost in the next mission. And oh yeah, absolutely. I spent 3 years over there. The Germans eventually surrendered, so they ordered all the Americans they had over there, they ordered them to Japan. So they took me out of my unit and flew me back to the States, put me on a boat, and I was on my way to Japan. And I didn't want to do that because the Japanese had called every one of their troops they had home. They was going to fight it out with us. And before we could get over there, they surrendered. She was about 3 years old. She come running out the front door, and "Mama, who's that man coming in here?" It was a happy time, I guess I say. I'm glad to see her. I wanted a job. I mean, I'd been teaching school for $60 a month. Eventually I said, "Well, you know, I enjoyed putting out the school newspaper. I'm going to do that." So they had Maplewood down here. The lady made a little Maplewood Star. So I came down here and gave her $1,000 for it and bought it and moved the family down here and started publishing the Maplewood Star. Then eventually the software one come up and saying I bought it, and then I went and started one in Leesville, and I started one in DeRidder, and then I started a big paper in New Orleans. I had a big paper in New Orleans, and I kept expanding, and that's the way it went. I'm all for it. I enjoyed the military, and I had a lot of bad times and good times.
I was 8 years old when the war started after Pearl Harbor, and for a long time the American people didn't want to go to war again. They experienced in World War II, they figured that was tough, and they just wanted to stay home and not get involved in foreign entanglements. Franklin Delano Roosevelt, who was president at the time, was on a tight spot because England wanted help badly. You know, the Germans had already invaded all of those mid-European countries, Poland, Yugoslavia, and Czechoslovakia. And we just didn't want to get involved. On one occasion, there was a shipload of Jews who came to this country hoping to find refuge, and they were turned away by the government. So the only way that Roosevelt could do something without alienating the public was Lend-Lease. And that's where we said we were going to lease airplanes, ships, and munitions, and all those things that people needed in the war. And the result was no one ever paid any lease funds. But it was his way of getting around the opposition to the war. Of course, all that changed when the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor. Everybody was ready to go to war then. I mean, young men couldn't wait to sign up and go. It was such a bad attack, and so many people were killed, and the surprise, because the Japanese ambassadors were all here in Washington talking to us at the time all of that happened. We had air raid drills. Every neighborhood had a block warden, and he went around and made sure you pull the shades down and cut your lights off. Everybody had a victory garden. We grew our own food, the troops and all. We needed the money. All the resources had to go to get ready to go to war. So they began rationing all of the things that we needed. Sugar, tires, cars, all kind of nylon. You couldn't buy nylon stockings and those kind of things. And every parish had a ration board. My aunt was on the ration board down in Cameron Parish where I spent my summers. And it was interesting, you got so many ration stamps for tires and sugar and things that were scarce and hard to get a hold of. And you had to make that last all month, so there wasn't a lot of travel. It was a tough time to get by. I worked in a grocery store part-time when I was 12 years old, and you had to watch folks, they couldn't buy certain things that they just didn't have the stamps to buy them. It was tough. Grocery owners had a hard time, had to turn people down that needed stuff, just couldn't afford it, or they didn't have the stamps to buy it. In those days, all the news got in the paper. I mean, I used to read about my mother making trips to Cameron where I was born. But they said, told you about everybody, where they were going, what they were doing, and in particular the war effort. They really had news in the paper every day. They had what they called V-mail then. And if you wanted to write a relative that was fighting in the war, you could write the letter, and the government censored the letter. They filmed it, sent the film overseas, and when it got to where your relative was, they printed the letter back from the film, so that the Germans and the Japanese couldn't get a hold of that information. Women got to be a big factor. Rosie the Riveter was the big slogan. They had posters all over the country about women going to work in these defense plants, and they really did a great job. It's probably the first time that women, really got into the workforce and stayed in there after the war. Some Japanese folks came over here selling and promoting yo-yos. You don't see yo-yos much anymore, but he said they came to this country and posed as Philippines. And some of them were spies, and some of them were caught at that time. And he said they were really interested in the port of Lake Charles. They, wanted to get pictures there. They wanted to get pictures of the petrochemical plants. And we had an airfield here, the Lake Charles Army Air Force. There was no Air Force branch at that time, and they wanted to, to get information there. So they were spies. I'm sure they were German spies too. So there was a lot of intrigue there that you don't usually think about going on in your hometown. They were on Sallier Street. There was an encampment there. I remember as a kid driving by there and seeing these German prisoners there. They worked in the community, farms and doing other things, and they were well treated, contrary to the way the American prisoners were treated by the Germans. But you just don't think about that, those things going on at that time. And a lot of people were surprised that there were so many German submarines out in the Gulf of Mexico. Every now and then you'd see a flash of light way out in the Gulf, and it was a ship that was being sunk by one of these German submarines. There was a great fear that those subs were going to come up into this area during the war. The channel was open then. So, you know, we were just in a war stage at that time. We had a big celebration when the Germans surrendered, but the final celebration, you know, that took place countrywide was when the Japanese phase of the war was over. You know, it was a tough decision that Truman made to drop those 2 atomic bombs, you know, Hiroshima and Nagasaki. But, you know, I'm convinced that he probably did the right thing, because the war would have dragged on for a long time. The Japanese just didn't give up. You know, they fought to the death. They were kind of like ISIS today. I guess you could say the war made us a big petrochemical complex here, and it's responsible for the great economic development that's going on here right now. You know, the first plant here was in the late 1930s, Matheson Alkali, but then you had City Service and Sitcon and Firestone. They all came in here, and mainly because of the war effort. And of course they grew, you know, tremendously after the war, but it really fueled our local, it made us an industrialized area here, it really did. The fervor for doing what they needed to do has never been duplicated since then. We've had a lot of people who answered the call in these other conflicts. You know, they deserve credit for that as well. But there were so many. You know, we went from being a country that didn't have any military at all to becoming one of the greatest military powers in the world, and we still are. We have a lot of competition today from China and Russia, so it's always an ongoing thing, unfortunately. You know, you always hope we'll find peace, and you always pray for peace, but whether it'll make it or not, I don't know.
Everybody wanted to get in the fight. He was very happy to get into the Pacific battles. For a long time, my father kept a telegram that he had received from the then War Department, before it was a Department of Defense. And shortly after the Pearl Harbor attack, he sent a telegram to necessary authorities asking to be reassigned, since he had, by that time, had been practicing law for 4 or 5 years, and he wanted to be reassigned to the JAG Corps. And so he sent a request, and he received a telegram back, which he loved and kept for a long time, and it says, "Lieutenant Hunter, we have received your request for a transfer to the JAG Corps. We have decided to fight the Japanese rather than soothe them, so please report to San Diego at your earliest convenience." And so that was, got the star on his epitaph, and was ready to move on to action. He was initially signed to the Saratoga, which was CV-3. And that CV-3 lets you know what a low number it is. The Saratoga was a Lexington-class carrier, but it was one of the first carriers, and actually the Navy had developed its carrier tactics just before the war by using the Lex and the Saratoga as the ships to prove what they were going to do. His battle station on the Saratoga was the anti-aircraft guns. So, you know, he's like all line officers, he took his time at the helm and doing various things. But when battle stations sounded, his task was to command the anti-aircraft guns. He had 6 battle stars, which every time the Saratoga would be engaged, you would get a battle star. I think that 5 of those were earned on the Saratoga, and 1 was earned on his second ship, which was the heavy cruiser St. Paul. I think one of the things that was very important to him that came out of the war was the discipline that you may have something that you don't agree with, or that you think Congress perhaps overstepped or understepped or whatever, but you follow the rules. You keep the faith with the system. And my father and my mother, they went up to Washington. They met with President Eisenhower and had lunch. And in fact, as he was leaving lunch, the president said, "Judge, will you do a favor for me?" "Yes, Mr. President, of course." And he said, "Well, I'd like you to locate your court in Lake Charles, Louisiana." We all picked up from Shreveport and we moved to Lake Charles. When he came in, that was, of course, during the Civil Rights Revolution. So he was appointed in 52, and I think in 53 he was already dealing with the issue of the small schools then, like McNeese and then USL, which were operated on a segregated basis. And my father, one of the first things he did was to eliminate the segregation at Lafayette and here in Lake Charles in that school system. That was one of his first deals. But it kept getting more and more of unfortunately, it was necessary to do interventions to get these things. And I think one of the things people probably remember, my father found it necessary to put a college roommate temporarily in jail. The roommate was then the Attorney General, who was Jack P. Grimion. The Attorney General was opposing the registration of Afro-Americans in East Carroll Parish, and my father was registering them under the Civil Rights Act of 1960. And when the Attorney General just stood up in court and was quite disrespectful, he said, "We will never do this, and we will fight this in the ditches." And so my father said, "Well, Jack, we're going to put you in jail," you know, and so he found him in contempt, active contempt. There are 2 kinds of contempt. You know, you can be contemptuous of a judge when he's not present, and you can be face-to-face contemptuous with the judge. And when you do the latter, you can find yourself incarcerated. So he had the U.S. Marshals take the Attorney General and put him in jail. It lasted 15, 20 minutes, and the Attorney General says, "Please take me back to Judge Hunter." And he apologized, and the voters were registered. He was a great, great father, and I have 2 sisters, both of whom live here in Lake Charles, and we just found him to be absolutely rock solid, just a great, great dad. He demonstrated that you could be very nice to people and still get the job done.